Welcome to Now That's Bass. I'm Pete Roythorne, and this is your weekly dose of bass insights. Thanks for joining us, and feel free to share your own insights and experiences in the comments. Before we start this interview, quick disclaimer: I should apologise for some slightly dubious pronunciations of Charles Bertou's name around about the 20-minute mark. So if you're listening, Charles, sorry. So welcome back. Today's guest is the current bassist with Pulp and the James Taylor Quartet. His career also includes stints with Sophie Ellis-Bextor and my two personal favourites, Kid Creole and the Coconuts and Engelbert Humperdinck. Not to mention, he's also head of bass at BIMM. Welcome, Mr. Andrew McKinney.
Hello. Hi. How's it going?
Not too bad at all. Thank you very much. So first off, I'd say head of bass. That's a pretty, that's a bit of a job title, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not actually my current job title, but yeah, head of bass was something I was obviously very proud to be. But yeah, I'm course leader for performance at BIMM London, which is based in Fulham. So yeah, so I sort of run the course, but also teach bass and teach other things. And I've been there for a very long time. So yeah, that's very much part of my DNA. So yeah.
That's cool. So, and also, I know you've been on tour with Pulp. I think you just got. Was it last week you got back?
I got back nearly 2 weeks ago. We went to Australia and New Zealand. So yeah, the last this is my sort of fourth year of playing with Pulp. So it's been amazing. We've been sort of all around the world and done lots of really great things. So yeah, I'm really lucky with that. But just got back. So I'm sort of I got back a little while ago. So. No, don't really have jet lag as an excuse anymore. So I don't think so.
So how long was the tour and how was it?
It was amazing. Yeah, we were there for 3 weeks. So we started in New Zealand and then went to Australia. So yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. It was really good. Yeah. We're very lucky, Pulp have been around a long time, obviously, and they've had sort of periods of touring and not touring. So these days, as people are getting older, they do tour, but they like to do it at a reasonable pace. So I'm a bit more used to the kind of sharp end of the gigging world, which is, leaving early, getting back late and all that sort of thing. But they like to take things at a slower pace. So we did have a lot of days off, so I tried to sort of maintain the pretense that I was hard at work, but it was, a lot of holiday was involved. I can't lie, it was brilliant. So yeah, it's really lucky for me to sort of join a band at that stage of the career. So and it's amazing, and the gigs just incredible. The crowd's always just going bananas. And then we finished at Sydney Opera House, so we're on stage, literally looking at Sydney Opera House, the Harbour Bridge to your left, and just the gigs are amazing enough as it is, but then you sort of look up and remember where you are and just think, this is just incredible. Yeah, so just trying to take it all in.
I can't remember who it was. One of my mates was saying to me that he went and saw a band that was probably slightly older than the Pulp crowd. And they were known as a bit of a rock band, and he said that he was really disappointed when he went backstage because it was all herbal tea and smells of Ralgex. It was kind of like
Yeah, we're certainly before the gig, things are normally pretty sedate. So sometimes invited guests back and then everyone's just sort of sitting around, but as you get closer to the gig, things sort of do ramp up a bit more. And we do, we do often have a little gathering or something afterwards, but nothing too crazy, which suits me. I'm not very good at that. So, we do have a good time.
That's cool. So I'll touch on how you kind of how you got into all that in a little bit, but let's just let's turn the clock right back and say, so where did your journey with bass start and how did it start?
Well, I played the cello at school. I sort of got into that. Music was something I sort of got into. I think I wasn't good at sports and all that sort of stuff, so started playing music and then became one of the sort of kids that hang around the music room nerds, and I felt more comfortable there. So I did that, and I did all the orchestras and whatever with that. I'm from Sussex originally, so that was really good. And then I was really good friends with some through school and through scouts and stuff, and also through the orchestras. My sort of best friend was a guitar player, and his brother played, and then they got a drummer. So they sort of formed a band. And I actually, because I was kind of like the fourth friend, I went along and I had my cello. And I remember trying to do a band. I remember trying to play Sweet Child of Mine on the cello, and we just sort of blue tacked a guitar pickup to it. And, and it's, this isn't really working. So my mum agreed to get me a bass when I was about 14. So I joined that band. And actually those three guys that I played with are now, and have been for a long time, in the band called The Feeling. So I actually went to see them last Friday. Yeah.
That's cool.
So yeah, had a really good start sort of being with those guys. So yeah, then I sort of, all my cello kind of connections in terms of like bands and school and all that sort of stuff, I also started playing bass guitar in. So I did have a bit more of a sort of formal, classical music background, and I sort of got into reading music quite early. But then I was also in this sort of rock band, and we were playing, Chili Peppers and, all that sort of stuff. So yeah. Then I went to BassTech, as it was called, so in Acton.
I remember BassTech. I used to work literally just around the corner from that, and I remember seeing everyone going in and out there.
Warple Way in Acton.
Yeah.
So I went there and did a 1-year diploma. I actually had a place to go and study science at university, because I didn't do music A levels and stuff like that. I just sort of did this 1-year course, 1-year diploma course. I'd seen it advertised in Bassist magazine or whatever, and ended up doing that for a year. And I thought, well, I'll go and do my proper degree. But when I got to BassTech, I just really enjoyed it. And I never really thought, or even though I'd done a lot of music, I just hadn't really considered it as a viable career. And then I got to college, I was like, actually, maybe it could be. And they were offering a 2-year course. So I ended up, actually, in the old days, I wrote a letter to the university saying, I'm not coming to study science. I'm going to stay and do this. So so that was, and then that kind of, I had a bit of session work by the time I left college, and sort of built it up from there, really.
So so how did that kind of first bits of session work come in? And was there a sort of network through college, or were there other networks that you had to kind of get into to get that work?
Yes to all of those things, basically. So when I was at college, I answered an advert. An advert came because they were, bands looking for band members to college or whatever. There was an audition. I auditioned for a band. I was attracted, not that this was my sole motivation, but they said they would pay, for rehearsals and pay for gigs. And they were a new band. They had a management deal or whatever. So I auditioned for that and got the gig. And then through that, I met a drummer who then said, actually, I play in a function band. I think you'd be good for that, which is completely different. It was soul music. So I joined that band through that. And then through that, I met a lot of people. The band was called Soul Power. It's not really going anymore, but for a long time, and it had a horn section. So I met, and those guys were sort of changing every gig, so I met a lot of horn players, which was really useful, for meeting more people and drummers and whatever. So that was kind of one avenue of work. And then the people I played with, like I said, that were in The Feeling, we had a band, we carried a band on with those guys. So we ended up doing a TV show, actually. We were at the house very randomly. We put a band together to do like disco tunes and stuff, and very randomly, again, going back in the mists of time, but we ended up being the house band on Channel 4's show called The Richard Blackwood Show.
Oh, okay.
This is the end of the 90s. So
yeah.
We did very randomly. So anyway, so that was like another sort of stream of work. So yeah, I think any one of those things, those sort of, it's like an opportunity that kind of becomes a sort of I don't know, like it sort of spreads out into a lot of different things. So I think most things I can trace back to one of those two routes. And also, actually, when I was at college, I got on very well with some of the tutors there, and a drum tutor by the name of Brian Green. He was very helpful to me. He liked me, and he just said, what you should do is phone up some other bass players and find out what they're doing. This is all obviously pre-internet and social media.
Yeah.
So the first bass player I phoned, just, hi, my name's Andrew, I'll be giving you a number. The thought of doing that these days just seems incredible, but or just like very different to how things are. There's no Instagram DMs, but so I phoned him up, and this guy called Phil Berry, and I just chatted to him on the phone. I ended up being on the phone for him for like an hour, just being super helpful. And then at the end, he was like, yeah, so I'll try and give some, put some depths your way. And I was like, what? I think, I don't know, we just had a good chat. Maybe Brian had put in a good work and said I could play. He liked the fact that I could read music because he was doing a lot of sort of theatre work and stuff like that. So that's been really useful in terms of like the West End stuff I've done. So there's like a few strands, that have kind of thankfully sort of expanded into all this stuff.
So it's interesting you talk about the kind of tutor thing, because obviously just for transparency for anyone that's kind of watching or reading this, obviously listening to this, sorry, obviously your initial kind of, to me, you sort of, I suppose, indirectly came to me by Greg Hoffman, who was the first guy I've interviewed in this series, and he said that it was kind of when he was at college, you were actually one of the ones that got him his first his first kind of, I think, probably his big job, which was kind of Depping and James Taylor Quartet.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a really nice thing, and something that I've sort of continued to do. And we all do, it's great to meet young musicians. And when you meet people like such as Greg, was just such a impressive person to have around, just great, obviously all those sort of things, he was at every lesson, he was super keen, he was super prepared, practice loads, really good attitude, all that sort of stuff. I remember one of the things that impressed me most with him, we had a bass masterclass with Anthony Wellington. Do you know that guy? He sort of just with Victor Wooten and did bass camp. Yeah. And I just remember him going, this is one of the things that stood out about Greg. I remember he asked for a volunteer. So Greg's got, I think he's still a student at the time, he got up. And then he's like, I can't remember what it was, but he sort of set some musical challenge. He goes, right, now I want you to find this note, and then I want you to find as many of those, like find an A. And he goes, right, how many other A's can you find? How well do you know the fretboard? And Greg just knew everything. It was so quick. Yeah. And Anthony Wellington was sort of, was just mega impressed. He was like, wow. He thought he was going to catch him out or something, just the way he was asking questions. But Greg was just, that's Greg, he's just like super hardworking. So then obviously when an opportunity comes up, you're like, got no doubt in my mind that, Greg's going to do a great job. But then I needed a depth for James Taylor Quartet. It's a completely safe pair of hands. And that's what you want, isn't it? Someone that's going to do the work, fit in, and have the musical ability to do that. So and that's kind of continued in terms of sort of working with students, and sort of that's a nice thing when you sort of transition from working with them in college to sort of seeing them out in the real world and kind of colleagues, which has happened a lot over the year.
And I think what I like about that particular story is that it's kind of like, it kind of goes along that lines of, you shouldn't, other bass players are not necessarily your competition. They're actually the sort of people that can open doors for you, because, we're all out there working, and, everybody at some point is going to need a dep for one reason or another. Yeah.
And depping is one of the key things in my career in terms of like meeting new people and getting new opportunities. It's being a dep. So and we, our bass players, we like to support each other, and you dep for me and I dep for you and all that sort of stuff. And it's and it's also nice to give those opportunities to people that show that potential, and it's continuing to do that to this day, really.
And so, how did your first big break come about?
Well, that Richard Blackwood show was pretty random. So that was a bit of a sort of lightning strike moment. But we'd put together a covers band, and we did a gig at some venue in Harrow, and then came back one day, and on the answer machine, I used to share a flat with Kevin, the guitar player, and on the answer machine was a message saying, we need a band for this TV show pilot. I used to work at that venue. I phoned them up and said, "Have you got any young funky bands?" And they said, so we could have been literally anyone. So we went to the TV studios, but we had been playing together for years already. So we went to the TV studio, to their offices actually, and they gave us all these musical cues to prepare. So we kind of learned them and we could play them, obviously. And then what they really liked though was they would say, "Oh, we'd play something." They'd say, "Oh, can you make that a bit shorter?" Or, "Oh, how about this?" And I remember them coming up with this idea. We're going to have this guest that's from Grange Hill or something. Can you play the Grange Hill theme? And then, Kieran on keyboards was like, "Oh yeah, should we?" He could very quickly, even if, we could very quickly, because we just had that sort of musical telepathy of kind of playing together a lot. And they were saying, they were just absolutely blown away because they're like, "Man," and, we used to working with more kind of, regimented sort of TV bands where if you make any changes, they're like, "Oh, hang on a minute, I've got to go and reprint all the parts or whatever." And we it did get a bit ridiculous in the end actually, because they would just like they just make all these last minute changes because they knew we'd sort of very quickly deal with it. But anyway, so that was a bit of a sort of very random thing, but yeah, brilliant experience at that time.
And was there a point that you came to, I suppose, kind of, that you thought, do you know what, actually I can make this work as a career, as a living?
Yeah, I think that was instilled in me when I was doing that diploma at BassTech. Just sort of realizing, because I just thought it'd be too difficult and I wasn't good enough before I went to college, even though I love music and I always wanted to play it. But when I got to college, it was like, no, if you work hard, and those things, I didn't feel I was the best musician around by any means, but the college thing was good for kind of realizing that if you apply yourself to things and practice, you can achieve. You can get better. You just especially with music, people talk about natural talent and all that sort of stuff, which is a factor, I'm sure to some extent, but also just showing that if you practice and if you work hard, you can achieve these things and you can get better. And I was like, that's what kind of was a sort of light bulb moment during that 1 year diploma. I was thinking, I think I can make a go at this actually. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I can see this, look around me and look at my lecturers and, and the sort of things they were doing and thinking maybe that's possible.
And how have you managed to sustain that career now, which is, obviously, I listed off some of the people you've played with, and it's a pretty impressive list of kind of names. So how have you managed to kind of, I suppose, keep the jobs coming in, but also sustain a career that, because not everybody lands in, U2 and is just like, that's the center point of their career for the rest of their lives. How have you built that career, I suppose, to work for you?
Well, I suppose it's kind of one step at a time, really. And I think if I was to give some advice on that, I would say I think what's important and what's worked well for me is really focusing, on what you're doing at the time. It sounds obvious, but a lot of people are sort of looking to progress their career, and which everyone is. And I was ambitious and still am, and want to sort of be moving forward and doing bigger and better things all the time. That sort of that's desire to prove yourself, and to improve is sort of inbuilt. But I think sometimes that can be mean people are looking sort of too far ahead and not really taking care of what they're doing at the time. So I think it's really important to not look at a situation and say, what can I get out of this situation, but more, what can I put into this situation? And I think that's really, so any kind of opportunity that comes up is just try and do the best job possible with respect to the event that's happening there, not so that then I can get another gig or this person. Obviously that stuff will happen a bit more organically rather than, I think sometimes it's a bit too contrived, or, you can meet people that are kind of trying a bit too hard to kind of network you. Do you know what I mean? Then that doesn't feel so good. So hopefully if you put enough into what you're doing at the time, then those things will happen.
Yeah, I mean, that I find that really interesting actually, because I think you do, and I have met people out there that are really clearly, obviously trying way too hard. And it does tend to backfire. I know that sort of like, because, the people that I do know that are professional musicians have said, yeah, you have to, when you get to a level that, clearly like yourself, you're at, it's like, if you are in a room with 3 other bass players and there's a sort of possibility to be in a particular project, you're all going to be able to play. You're all going to know what you're doing. You're all going to be, you're all going to know that you've partially got to be, good blokes to hang out with as well. And it's this, that, and the other. So it's kind of, I suppose the question in that is, how do you stand out? How do you make it, well, that's just it. How do you stand out?
Well, I think, like I said, I think it's doing the best I mean, there's a phrase, I don't know who this is attributed to, but in terms of being a session musician, it's kind of, a session musician plays the right thing at the right time all the time. So that's kind of, obviously that's quite a high standard to put yourself to, but that's an aim, but also I think, I think that obviously there's musical factors, but also your personality and who you are as a person is really important. And I think there are opportunities out there pretty much for everyone, because there is some, I think when you get, especially when you're dealing in music college or you're learning and stuff, you kind of view musical ability or chops or whatever it is as the kind of thing that separates bass players. And maybe in some gigs it might be, but a lot of gigs that's not really required, So I like to do an interesting sort of thought experiment with this. Is I think of like the most crazy bass player you can, in terms of, who would you say like really very renowned for, let's say, technique or something like that?
Charles Berthold.
Okay, Charles Berthold. So you take him and imagine the band that he would be least suitable for. Just try and put him, what would be the band? I don't know.
Buzzcocks.
It's amazing. Sorry?
The Buzzcocks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure he would do an amazing job, but that's, but it's just a fun little thing, because, so that's just sort of showing you that, it's not just about musical ability or whatever. That's a factor. The music's got to be there, but also, you or I might be in a certain band. Your musical ability is one thing, but it's, your personality, or how your relationships with people, because I'm generally sort of one of the sort of quieter people around, and you sort of grow up thinking, oh, it's all the extroverts that are going to get all the work, the sort of loud, funny people. And when you're in rooms with those sort of people, you sort of feel a bit like not worthy, but not every band needs a band full of extroverted, loud, funny people or whatever, So
no, exactly. Yeah,
it's your demeanor or your character or the other things, your other interests outside of music, that kind of might do that. So I kind of feel there's places for everyone. I don't know if that makes sense or that holds true.
No, that makes perfect sense, actually. And I mean, it kind of leads. There was another question that came out of my head. It came to me as you were talking through that, and I'm thinking, like, who is the most important person in the band that, as a bass player, you need to have a connection with? To kind of, so I suppose somebody then, if you're looking to be in a situation where you need an advocate, who would you sort of say the most important person is?
I mean, I really think that can be anyone. I mean, the obvious answer there for bass player is a drummer, because, we have a sort of really close musical connection. My best friends are drummers, and I sort of, in terms of listening to music, that's the kind of, I have a joke with some drummer friends of mine that I sort of know more about drummers than they do, and they know more about bass players, in terms of who.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you might find that yourself as well, in terms of who plays on one track. But anyway, I just, in a band, I think that, all those relationships are important, really. So, musically and socially and all those sort of things. So, I think everything's sort of very interconnected and kind of interdependent. So, but I think I'm naturally someone who likes to I enjoy getting on with people and trying to sort of, musically and socially. And it's funny, those things, how musical things and social things are kind of can be interconnected as well. So that's constantly interesting.
And it's kind of going back in that conversation as well, because you talk about, you obviously me talking about Charles Berthold playing with Buzzcocks, that kind of idea, and sort of like, you have, I think, the kind of juxtaposition, if you like, between the James Taylor Quartet, which sounds like a great gig from just a playing perspective, to Pulp, which is clearly, Pulp. I don't naturally sit down and go, oh wow, amazing bass playing, which may be really unfair because I haven't really sat down and particularly listened to, but you don't kind of necessarily think of Pulp as being, a bass player's band. Whereas James Taylor Quartet, certainly having played in soul bands and in the past and done Starsky and Hutch covers themes and stuff like that, that would be one of the ones that I would love to play in, just from a playing perspective. So you've got a nice juxtaposition there between the two of them.
And that's really satisfying and rewarding and enjoyable, just to be able to go from such different musical contexts. But I really relish that challenge, and that I find that sort of my way of being creative really is sort of finding, I mean, James Taylor Quartet is musically I'd say, I went to see the James Taylor Quartet when I was 18, and, I learned Gary Crockett's bass lines, and, I practiced that stuff, and that was kind of, so that's a bit more musically, where I was coming from. But I really like that situation in any case of sort of trying to do the musically the best thing, and trying to sort of work out, okay, what is the best thing to do here, in terms of music. And starting to work with Jarvis, which I did with an original project before it was Pulp, was a really kind of, different direction for me musically. So that was really kind of almost like starting again, sort of writing songs and coming up with more creative bass lines, and having quite a different role as a bass player. So obviously I felt huge, doses of imposter syndrome, and like I could so easily list off so many bass players that I feel would be better in that situation than me. But I really relished the challenge, and I was like, okay, this is a whole new world. And I felt really sort of fortunate to be in that situation. So, my listening changed, my sort of approach to playing sort of changed, sort of evolved that. And I really relished that as a challenge. So it's something I feel lucky to be able to do.
And it's interesting you touch on the imposter syndrome, because I was going to ask you about that, but before, and so we'll come back to and say also what I want to do after that is kind of look at we can talk about how the whole Jarvis stuff came about. But yeah, that's so. Tell me about, it's like, what are the worst kind of imposter syndrome kind of feelings you've had, and where and when?
Yeah, well, I suppose those sort of first rehearsals with Jarvis, I remember, because I'd been like a session musician, obviously up to that point, James Taylor Quartet, I'd done a lot of West End musical theatre as well, and then just a lot of random stuff. And then I met Jarvis through doing a gig. I was doing a last-minute dep with a band, the Heritage Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. So my friend Adam Betts, who was playing drums with that band, he used to play in the James Taylor Quartet. They needed a bass player last minute, so I ended up joining, and Jarvis was one of the singers for this Scott Walker prom thing, which was an incredible experience. And I felt quite far out of my comfort zone already with that, because I got the call and they said, "Oh, we thought of you, because it's quite an old school." I don't know if you know the music of Scott Walker at all.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really know a lot about it at the time, and we thought of you, because you've got. Because I play a 1962 P bass with flat wounds with the JTQ thing. So, we thought of you because it's got that old school sound. And then I was like, okay, great. Yeah, cool. But it's more of an orchestral thing. So it's following a conductor, which I've done a bit of as well. So yeah, great. I'm all over this. And then I listened to it. I was like, oh shit, it's all with a pick. And I sort of virtually never played with a pick before.
Wow.
Yeah, and I was like, oh God, so it is that old school sound, but it's more of a sort of thuddy, sort of Carol Kay type sort of, and I was like, oh, okay, right. So I was really out. Anyway, so You know, that was one of the most nervous I've ever been, because it's on TV and radio and all that sort of stuff. And the 80-piece orchestra, choir, and all this sort of stuff. And
but
yeah,
you must have done a decent job, because that was the route into Pulp and Jarvis Cocker.
Yeah. And then Jarvis contacted me and Adam afterwards saying, you know, I think what he'd done is he'd accepted a gig. So he just got in touch saying, I've got a gig in Iceland on New Year's Eve. Sigur Rós run a festival in Iceland. I can't remember. It's in Icelandic. So do you want, I want to put a band together and do this gig. So I was like, yeah, fine. So then that was a process of going into a rehearsal room. And I remember just, the situations where you try and be like the sort of swan or whatever, graceful on the water, but underneath your legs are actually get So I got into this rehearsal room. He'd sent like 10 tracks through. So in my session musician head, I was like, right. And I was running around. I was at college and doing loads of other stuff. So I was like, right, learn everything I've got, because my job as a session musician is to prepare all the material and just go and be able to play it correctly, So I did that. And then we so we played some of these things, but when you're sort of working so fast, you're not really thinking about what you're doing. You're just doing, so which happens to me quite a lot. So I was just like, learn, do it. Got in the room, played one of the things or whatever. And then I think Jarvis was like, yeah, okay, cool. Let's do that again. And my sort of session player head was thinking, why? We played it correctly. That was what was on the thing, because I'm used to sort of those rehearsals, prior to that, I'd done about 2 rehearsals in about 10 years, so So Jarvis wanted, obviously, then I was reading, okay, these are not finished. These are just ideas. And then I actually sort of used my brain a bit and went, oh yeah, of course. They didn't really sound like full songs. So anyway, so it was full ideas. So I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do it again. And then try different things out. So it was a really kind of creative process, but like, rewriting the rules of music in my head as we went along, or just the way I'd been used to working. That actually gives you really good perspective on how it is you normally work. And then you realize, oh yeah, I don't normally do this. Normally you do all your practice at home. And when you're actually there, whether it be at the rehearsal or the session or the gig or whatever, you're just trying to sort of get the best result in the minimum time possible. That is kind of that kind of world, whereas Jarvis is more from a world of kind of, okay, we're in a band, let's get together, let's spend time together, let's play the songs, let's play them again, let's try different things out. So that was a real, but also I was very that's when the imposter syndrome is thing. I'm thinking, I'm not the right person for this, but I like the challenge. So I was like, okay, so yeah. And then I realized my role up to that point in a lot of situations is kind of playing, good sound. Not that it's not this, but we focus on playing like bass lines that sound and feel really good, funky, tasteful bass lines or whatever. And then with a really good groove and all that sort of stuff. And then you get into this situation, you're like, that's not really, I mean, it's still important, but realized slowly over a series of rehearsals that it's quite a different headspace. I realized my role is a bit more kind of textural. So I really got into sort of sounds and effects. And I think those principles of kind of playing in time and with good sounds and all that sort of stuff still apply. It was quite creative. That sort of the lineup of the band was quite interesting because we sort of had harp, violin, bass, not much guitar really. So I had quite a lot of space. So I was ending up using a lot of different effects and things. And yeah, it was really creative and interesting. But yeah, you sort of do it for long enough and the imposter syndrome doesn't sort of go away, but it just sort of fades a bit. You know, maybe what I am doing is all right. Yeah.
That's cool. So how long were you doing that for before the Pulp vacancy very unfortunately came up?
Well, so that band became called Jarvis. We did about 5 years of great, gigs, festivals. We actually did 2 albums. We did TV soundtrack. We did loads of sort of, if you hang with Jarvis, just, really fun, interesting things come up. So we did that for 5 years. And then in 2023, Jarvis said, "Oh, we're going to do a Pulp reunion." Us in the new band, the new members were, just a bit, "Oh, okay, that probably means this gig is coming to an end." But he said, "Oh no, I think I might be able to use some of you." And actually, he said to me that Steve Mackey wasn't going to do the tour. So, I don't know the background to that, but he wasn't going to do the tour. So he was wondering if I would play bass, and I was like, "Yeah, of course, I'd love to." And obviously, very sadly, like while we were rehearsing, he passed away, which was really sad. And he's obviously like a massive part of the sound of that band and the kind of creative direction of the band. So, that was a big loss. So, but yeah, so basically what happened with the band was gradually, so myself and Emma Smith joined originally. So there's 4 original members of Pulp, which is, Jarvis, Candida, Nick and Mark. And then Emma and myself joined. And then during the rehearsals, then the sort of band expanded. So Adam, the drummer from Jarvis, came in to do some percussion and BBs and all that sort of stuff. So, and now there's actually 9 of us on stage because it's basically become the 2 bands virtually put together. So yeah.
That's so cool. That's such it sounds great, and I love the fact that it's kind of like you certainly with the Jarvis stuff that you're always that thing of you're always learning, you're always kind of pushing the boundaries, always doing something new and always developing. But let's kind of like drawing this to a conclusion, the conversation a little bit. There's a few things I wanted to get on and ask you. One of which is, give me 3 things that you think I or anyone really should focus their attention on to really kind of improve their chances of gigging.
3 things. Okay, the first thing I said already. So really focus on what you can contribute now. So in whatever situation is, how can you make yourself the most valuable and the kind of make the sort of best and most valuable contribution to the situation that's happening right there, not the gig that you want to be doing in however months time. So I'd say that. I would say second one, focus on what you like doing. It kind of sounds obvious, but if you don't, you're sort of playing to your strengths. I don't know. I suppose certainly when I was at college and, my 20s and stuff, you're sort of trying to do everything. You hear, I remember hearing Victor Wooten and going, okay, I'm going to try some of that. And, sort of trying everything out. And then over time, you sort of, you kind of gravitate towards the stuff that you like and that you're good at, which is a natural part of the process. But I think, I mean, it's good. I guess I'm saying 2 things in one there, in that it's good to remain broad and open-minded. I'm constantly impressed by bass players from all different genres and thinking I should learn that and doing bits and pieces here and there when I can. But there's that. But there's also really, leaning into your strengths, I think is really good. So that will tend to get a better result and also, lead to more opportunities. And what's the third thing? I mean, I suppose, the third thing would be, especially in establishing a career, it's obvious and people have said it before, but just saying yes to everything. I think I certainly did this for a very long time in terms of saying yes to things because, any opportunity I think is, any sort of thing is an opportunity to sort of meet new people, to learn new things and maybe to earn some money as well. So when you have those sort of 3 opportunities, then I think that's really good. And for me, I certainly said yes for a very long time in my career before I started, maybe being a little bit more, I'm still basically up for anything, but normally it's more about time. It's like, will I have time to kind of together? And a lot of gigs involve a lot of preparation and stuff like that. And obviously with my college job and all the other gigs I've got on my that tend to be the reason I would say no, but in principle, if I'm available, I'm up for it. So,
which is kind of interesting because obviously, I'm coming to this sort of at my age. It's interesting because it's like you think, well, time is the issue, isn't it? It's like when you're in your 20s, it's like you've got time. Now I'm kind of like trying to do something in my late 50s. It's like, yeah, where's the time going to come from for all that? But it's I suppose if you want something, you make the time.
Yeah,
and
I believe in terms of what you have to offer as a bass player, as a musician, and as a person, there is a scenario or many scenarios out there where you are going to be better than Charles Berthoud for that gig.
Yeah,
I think I believe that. So, good luck to you, but I'm sure it will come. Or continue to
I love that. It just sort of like, I love that. I will sort of go and I'll go and make some comment on Charles's Instagram page next time and say, Andrew McKinney said.
I think he's great, obviously, but
oh yeah, no, unquestionably. But I mean, suppose
unique, that's the thing, is that you're unique, and
well, that's a really good point that I think I need to remember, and I think everyone needs to remember.
Yeah, rather than comparing yourself to other people. That's a kind of good. Try and remind ourselves of that. It's not easy, but
no, exactly. And I think part of the problem being the fact that you go on the internet and it's just it's wall to wall, just incredible virtuoso bass players. And I know I've said this before, and I will probably say it in every single interview that I do. It's it can be terrifying when you go out there and look at what's out there.
I would say, as I suppose, as a counter to that, because one of the guys I really like is Mono Neon, and he's his player, and you see the stuff he does on the internet, and you think, wow, that is great, and then you think, but I don't do that sort of thing. So, I'm good at what I do. He does good at what he does. It's fine. But then there's an album with is it Scary Pockets thing with Larry Goldings, where Mono Neon's playing bass and he's just playing soul and funk, and he plays it so well and so tastefully. And I was like, damn, that's my area. He's really good at that as well.
Yeah, for God's sake, man, get back in your lane.
Yeah, no, he's one. I actually did a gig when he was there, which was one of the most absurd things. With my little funk band, we did a late set at Ronnie's, and the main band. I've got a little funk band that I playing with a couple of friends, and the main set was Ghost Note, which was Mono Neon and the guys from Snarky Puppy, and they were the main show, and then we were on afterwards, and they all hung out and stayed, and then there's me sort of doing lame bass solos and Mono Neon's walking around it. But it was one of those situations that was so absurd that I couldn't even be nervous. It was just like, there's no point. It's like, it's just such a farce that I just found it funny, fortunately.
I remember I mentioned Dale Davis, Amy Winehouse bass player, saying to me that he had a similar experience when he was playing for Paul Young, with Pino Palladino in the audience, or at least Pino turned up beforehand, and it wasn't till he came off stage he actually realised Pino wasn't there. He had actually left. So, but when you sat there playing Wherever I Lay My Hat and you think that Pino Palladino's in the audience, it's a bit like squeaky bum time.
I wouldn't be doing that for that would be terrifying.
But so if you could sort of, let's say you're now sat next to, the young Andrew McKinney, sort of just starting out, still playing cello, what would you say? What advice would you give to yourself?
That's a good question. I did, because I listened to other podcasts, so I did have
a think about it. You knew that one was coming.
I was slightly prepped. It's a funny one, because I think in the first instance, I would think, tell yourself, don't worry so much, be a bit more confident. It is going to work out all right. You don't need to be, just be a bit more confident in yourself and your abilities, and back yourself a bit more. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to say. But then also, I think, but if I did say that to myself, maybe I wouldn't have worked so hard. Do you know what I mean?
That's a good point, actually.
Anxiety and kind of desire to prove yourself, and I wouldn't. I'd worry I'd become complacent. So what would I say to a younger version of myself? Just nothing. Obviously, because I'm really fortunate the way things have worked out. So I wouldn't change any. I don't think I would change anything. So I'll pass on that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I mean, I think it's a great thing to be at a point in your life and go, actually, do you know what? I'm really happy with where I am. Why would I change the route? You know?
It probably would have last worrying a bit less.
Yeah. Well, but as you say, you know, it's sometimes, I think it's that anxiety and worry that fires you up and moves you forward.
If you can use it positively, yeah, which I was lucky to be able to do. Yeah.
Okay. And last question, last but not least, one bass line everybody should know, and why?
I did think about this as well. Yeah. I have, quite a few years ago, a friend of mine turned me on to the Bob Marley live album, Babylon by Bus. I don't know if you've heard it, but the bass playing on that, and I've always sort of thought, you know, if you had like someone who just came to you to learn bass and had never learned anything before, I'd love as a little experiment to just teach them that album to start. I think you would just have such a good, just understanding of bass and what it can do, you know, in terms of, you know, rhythm, placement, sound, melodic sensibility and all that sort of stuff. I just think that would be such a good launching point for your understanding of bass. Just, you know, Family Man on that and the rhythm section, the whole thing. So yeah, any tune off that, you know, maybe I really like Rat Race. It's really so simple, mostly just one note, but so well. Yeah, it's just glorious. So yeah, if you haven't heard that, yeah, check that live album. I mean, any of the Bob Marley stuff, but that I really like that live album.
Awesome. Great way to end. Andrew, been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me.